we don't need to worry about. What we also find out is that warnings can be well-meaning, but we should not stop our mission. Should not stop our mission. Some warnings could be... So what I'm saying here too is that some warnings we hear should not always be ignored. If we're truly set out to do what Christ has called us to do, we need not worry. But if we think that we're setting out to do what Christ is doing, we may not be 100% sure. So sometimes listening to somebody's warnings, taking to heed what they have to say, should help us to be ready to sit down and be willing to pray and say, okay, am I truly going out to do what you want me to do? Now, like what Erwin with Mannix was talking about, don't use prayer as an excuse to do nothing. Pray about it and then go do something. And see where God leads us. See what I'm saying? So, we may have those warnings, we may hear what those warnings is. So here's an example. You're going to go out and you're going to serve. You decide you're going to go out and serve somebody. You're going to go serve a church out in a potentially dangerous area because there's a war going on. Somebody says, hey, you know what? You're foolish. You're going to go out. You're going to get shot. Well, there's a warning that we can take to heart. Well, you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I will go and get shot. Maybe I can do something to protect myself. Maybe I can put some body armor on. But it shouldn't stop our mission. If Christ called us to do something, don't let it stop our mission. If you look at Isaiah 54, we see that he talks about that. Isaiah 54, 16 to 17. Behold, I have created the blacksmith who blows the coals in the fire, who brings forth an instrument for his work. And I have created the spoiler to destroy. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is from me, says the Lord. He says, yes, there's going to be people out there who are going to try to stop you, but don't let them stop you. Because I'm the one who's in charge. Every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. Don't do it in such a way that it pushes people away, but do it in a way that you do it in a gentle manner, and know that if you truly are following Christ, what people have against you that will stop your mission, if it's a Christ-driven mission, just let it roll off your shoulders. Just brush it off. Don't take it personal. So let's take a look at starting in verse 15. We're going back into Acts 21, starting in verse 15. We see that Paul set out to finish strong, despite misunderstandings. So verse 15. And after those days we packed and went up to Jerusalem, and some of the disciples from Caesarea went with us, and brought with them a certain Manasseh of Cyprus, an early disciple with whom we were to lodge. And when we came to Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly. On the following day, Paul went in with us to James, and all the elders were present. When he had graded them, he told in detail those things which God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. It's kind of interesting that Paul, when he meets up with the disciples, he's talking about what God is doing through him to the Gentiles. Like it's whenever you see Paul, I think this is really encouraging. Whenever you see Paul meet up with the Jews again to talk about what God is doing, he's always sharing about what God is doing. I think it's a great way for us to be able to encourage and say, when we meet up with fellow believers, I think it's okay to say, hey, guess what God is doing in our ministry? Guess what God is doing through me? Guess what God is getting ready to do for us? I forgot to mention this. We're having a VBS in July. It's July 14th through the 19th, right? We're planning big. We maybe have a small amount of people, but we're planning big. Because we believe that God is going to do something big with that. October 24th and 25th, we're going to have a couple seminar. Married, dating, come join us. We're planning something big. We may be small, but we're planning big because we believe God is going to do something. But we just set out. But we share. We share about what God is doing in our ministry. And maybe some of it's bragging a little bit, but that's okay. But also, it's also to re-encourage other people that God is still working. God is still working. And He's reaching people that haven't been reached before. So we pick back up. In verse 20, it says, "And when he heard it, they glorified the Lord, and they said to him, 'You see, brother, how many myriads of Jews there are who have believed, and they are all zealous for the law. But they have been informed about you that they teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, nor to walk according to the customs. What then? The assembly must certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come.'" Here's the misunderstanding. They're saying that Paul is going out and saying, you know what, don't get circumcised. You know what, don't follow Moses' teaching. But that's not what Paul is saying. What's going on is that, remember, a few chapters back, when the new Gentiles were being coming to know who Christ was, there were the brothers who came in and said, you have to be circumcised. If you're a follower of God, you have to be circumcised. If you're a follower of God, you can't eat the meat of the temples. If you're a follower of God, you must do this. They were putting on, this is what you must do. If you don't do this, you're not a true follower of God. So they went back and they took it back to the elders in Jerusalem, and they talked about it, and they wrote a letter and saying, just abstain from the meat from the temples. That's all we ask you to do. Not because we're not putting requirements on you. We're asking you to do that because we just want you to not be a hindrance to other people's walks. Just remember that we're saved by grace. What that reminds me of, when I look at this again, I've talked about this always, but it's a reminder of when I was going to church, there was requirements put on me to be in church. I had to be dressed in a certain way. Do you know that in the church I grew up in, if I walked in like this, I'd be thrown out? Because I had to have a suit and tie on. If you didn't have a suit and tie on in some of these churches, they wouldn't let you in the door. Is that why did Christ tell us that we had to be a suit and tie to come to Him? No. What Christ said was, come as you are. Christ said, come as you are. But you know what's cool is? He said, if you come as you are, I'm not going to leave you as you are. I'm going to change you. Does that mean that we come in and torn up the flip-flops and torn shorts and shirt, and that Christ is going to make us wear clean clothes, or, suit and ties? No, not always. We could probably still be some. There's some guys that I know that they still are torn shorts and flip-flops, and that's just the way they are, but their hearts have changed. Their lives have changed. They reach many people. What I'm saying is this. We're not telling you, we should never tell anybody that you have to dress a certain way to come to church. Should never tell anybody that. But I'm also saying this. Know that the church is supposed to be a hospital for sinners, not a clubhouse for the saints. So every one of us in here are sinners, including myself. And we need to remember that Christ is continuously working on us. So I say that again because let me point out something that happened just yesterday. Did you guys know that the Gay Pride Parade in Albuquerque happened yesterday? Some yes, some no. The sad part about these people who are doing the Gay Pride Parade is that they're celebrating a lifestyle that they want everybody to accept. Okay? They're trying to force their will onto everybody else. You have to recognize that this is our lifestyle and you have to like it. I'm going to tell you this. The church has said, no. you have to accept what God says. And as a matter of fact, I didn't think I'd see this, but there was a post that I see on Facebook that somebody had put up with a sign holding up the gay pride parade. God hates homos. At the risk of getting emails from people saying that I'm wrong, this is what I'm going to tell you. When you read what God said in His Word, He said, "For God so loved the world that He sent His only Son, that whoever so believes in Him shall not perish." Okay? We start off with that. Whoever believes in Christ will not perish. Okay? Now, what does that mean for us as believers? It means that when we go through the Word and we study what the Word says, it says that there are certain things we need to stay away from. Guess what? Paul wrote to the church and said, God hates homosexuals, hates murderers, hates liars, but he also said, which some of you were. What he's saying is that God hates the particular sins that you commit. He loves you, but He hates the sins that you commit. So what he's saying is what we learn through the Word is that as we become believers, we need to see what is it that we need to do to be a believer, to be a follower of Christ. It means that we need to put off the stuff of the world. We need to put off the stuff that makes us selfish. We need to put off the stuff that God says is not righteous. What he's saying is if you're a murderer, God still loves you. And His desire is that you get away from that. God is saying if you're living in sexual sin of any sort, whether it be homosexuality, cohabitating, sex outside of marriage, adultery, God would rather that if you're following Him, that you get out of that lifestyle and you make it right. And you make it right. He's saying that if you're cohabitating, if you're having sex outside of marriage, He's saying get married or separate. He's saying if you're a homosexual, He's saying get out of that sin and become right with me, because I want you to be part of me. He's saying if you're a murderer, stop committing murder and repent. He's saying if you're a thief, stop stealing. He's saying if you hate people, stop hating. He wants us to be lovers of Him and to be lovers of men and women. And He wants us to get right. And that's the only reason why we can't be there. He's also said, and let me point out to this for people who will even argue with me on this point, He also said that if you are a believer and if you're fellowshipping with people who say they are believers who are committing these sins, stay away from them. Stay away from them. He did not say that if they're not a believer and they're committing these sins that we're to stay away from them. Because guess what? He told us to go out and reach them. Because it's impossible for us to stay out of the world. He's saying stay away from those who are committing these sins who are calling themselves believers. But He's saying for us that we're still to go out to the world and help and change their minds by the way we act. It starts with us. If we're going to go out and tell somebody that homosexuality is a sin, we need to make sure that our lifestyle is that we're changing first. And we need to help them to learn what it means to follow Christ. Sorry, it's something I'm passionate about right now because I'm seeing so many people push people away from Christ because of the way they're going out and putting up these signs. We need to look at what is it that we're doing wrong. And what we're doing wrong is that we're not showing the love of Christ. Christ, yes, he went in and he cleaned the temples, but guess what he was doing? He was cleaning the temples and he was telling them to get out of the temples because these are people who said they were followers of God, but they were not being righteous in his eyes. They were doing stuff against what God said. If you're a follower of God, then do what he asks you to do. Do what he asks you to do, because guess what he's going to do? You're missing out on the blessings that he's going to give you. If you're not following him, if you're not doing what you can to follow him and being obedient to what he tells us, you're missing out on the blessings. You're missing out on the blessings. But don't condemn somebody in the world because they don't know what it means to be a follower of Christ. If you're not living a lifestyle that shows what it means to be a follower of Christ, they're not going to hear you. It's going to be the idea of, why should it be any different? Why is it any different? Why should I want to be a follower of Christ? Sorry, I went on this tangent, but starting verse 22, what then? The assembly must certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come. Therefore do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. Take them and be purified with them, and pay their expenses so that they may shave their heads, and that all may know that those things of which they were informed concerning you are nothing, but that you yourself also walk orderly to keep the law. But concerning the Gentiles who believe, we have written and decided that they should observe no such thing, except that they should keep themselves from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, from sexual immorality. Then Paul took the men, and the next day, having been purified with them, entered the temple to announce the expiration of the days of purification, at which time an offering should be made for each of one of them. So they're saying that, Paul, we know. Some of the others are like, Paul, we know you're not the one who said this. We know this is a letter that came out, and people are misinterpreting that. How many times have we had people misinterpret what we say? Well, I mean, seriously, when we think about that, what's happened to us, right? Paul, we know that's not what you're doing, but this is what we ask you to do. Take these guys who were Nazarites and pay for their vows to show that you're not saying that you're not blowing everything out of the water to follow God. Take care of their vows. Set the example. Help people see. So what we find here, first thing we find is misunderstandings are caused by miscommunication. Miscommunication. That's probably one of the reasons why why James said, "Be quick to listen and slow to speak, and slow to anger," because we have a lot of times when we're talking to somebody, we have something in mind. We're ready to answer somebody, and when we have something in mind how we're going to answer them, that we usually are not hearing what they're trying to tell us. Miscommunications. Guess what? One of the reasons why we have the couple seminar coming up in October is because women hear things differently than men hear things. Okay? And it's always going to be that way from the end of time. Is that wrong? No. It's just different. Women may say, I'm going to the store. General statement. First thing a guy thinks, she's going to go spend money. She's going to the store and she's going to go spend money. The woman could be, however, saying, I'm going to the store because I want to go check something out. I just want to go and get some information. Woman's going to get some fact-finding. Guys thinking she's going to go spend money. Next thing you know, there's a fight. Tension builds up. If you don't understand, ask for clarification, is all I'm saying. Miscommunication is the biggest thing that causes problems. Causes problems. Causes misunderstanding. Look at 2 Timothy 2. Here's Paul talking to Timothy. Here's Paul talking to Timothy and reminding him, this may be why it's better to have better communication. He says, remind them of these things, charging them before the Lord not to strive about words to no profit to the ruin of hearers. Be diligent to present yourselves approved to God, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. But shun profane and idle babblings, for they will increase more ungodliness. And their message will spread like cancer. Hymenaeus and Philetus are of this sort, who have strayed concerning the truth, saying that the resurrection is already past, and they overthrow the faith of some. Nevertheless, the solid foundation of God stands, having this seal: the Lord knows those who are his, and let everyone who names the name of Christ depart from iniquity. Don't listen to the idle babblings. Don't let your girlfriend come to you and say, do you know what my boyfriend, do you know what my husband said, do you know what I did, blah, blah, blah. Put away the idle babblings. Because there's obviously a miscommunication that happened. If there's tension going on, more likely it's because you need to go get clarification of what was said or what's going on. Misunderstandings happen from miscommunications. Big thing. The second thing we pick up is, though, showing humility can guide people back to understanding. Now, you may be the person who's misunderstood, you may be the person who's accused, but guess what's going to happen? If you come with a humble heart, with humility, you can guide people right back to what's really being told. Be humble. Be humble. Christ was humble, we need to be humble. A truly humble man is hard to find, but God delights to honor such selfless people. Booker T. Washington, the renowned black educator, was an outstanding example of this truth. Shortly after he took over the presidency of Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, he was walking in an exclusive section of town when he was stopped by a wealthy white woman. Not knowing the famous Mr. Washington by sight, she asked if he would like to earn a few dollars by chopping wood for her. Because he had no pressing business at the moment, Professor Washington smiled, rolled up his sleeves, and proceeded to do the humble chore she had requested. When he was finished, he carried the logs into the house and stacked them by the fireplace. A little girl recognized him and later revealed his identity to the lady. The next morning, the embarrassed woman went to see Mr. Washington in his office at the Institute and apologized profusely. "It's perfectly all right, madam," he replied. "Occasionally I enjoy a little manual labor. Besides, it's always a delight to do something for a friend." She shook his hand warmly and assured him that his meek and gracious attitude had endeared him and his work to her heart. Not long afterwards, she showed her admiration by persuading some wealthy acquaintances to join in her in donating thousands of dollars to the Tuskegee Institute. Humility not only will guide people back to understanding, but showing humility in times of misunderstanding will help other people to be involved in what you're doing. Paul had every right to say, "You guys are screwed up in the head. You guys don't know what's going on. You guys," he had every right to lash them because he had to prove. But what did he do? He showed humility. Mr. Washington had every right, Booker T. Washington had every right to correct a woman and say, "Don't you know who I am? Don't you know who I am? You're asking me to do a menial task." Instead, what did he do? Rolled up his sleeves, chopped the wood, put the wood, stacked it up neatly, and went on his way. Show humility. It'll help people back on the track, and like I said, a lot of times it'll help people to be involved in what you're doing. Because Paul showed humility, and he went and he paid the vows to the people for the Nazarites. More people got involved in behind his work. More people got involved in helping spread the word of the gospel. More people got involved in helping start the church or edifying the church. Be humble. Let's wrap up this chapter. Verse 27, "Now when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him, crying out, 'Men of Israel, help! This man who teaches all men everywhere against the people, the law in this place, and furthermore he also brought Greeks into the temple, has defiled this holy place.' For they had previously seen Trophimus, the Ephesian, with him in the city, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple." See, misunderstanding again. See the accusations. Paul brought in this Greek into the city. They immediately assumed, because Paul was teaching in the temples, that he brought this guy into the temple. Paul, being who he was, understood that in order to get across, he needed to stick with what they asked. The Greeks stayed where he was supposed to, right? I don't know if some of you guys were here before, but I talked about that there were certain entry levels in the temple, the way it was built. There's the outer gate where the Greeks couldn't come in. The Gentiles, they couldn't come in past the outer gate. They could be there to worship, but they couldn't come in from the outer gate. And then there was a spot where the servants could be coming in, who were not Gentiles, so they were part of the assembly. They could come into a certain point. And then the women could come to a certain point. And then the men were the ones who were allowed to be close. And then even then, they couldn't go any further because then it was the priest who would go to the holy place, and it was the high priest once a year who would come to the most holy place. So there were certain entry levels. Now, I don't know about you, but I appreciate the fact that Christ died on the cross so that I can go into the most holy place every day. So that I can speak with my God every day because of what Christ has done. Misunderstanding. Here's accusation starting. So, starting in verse 30, and all the city was disturbed, and the people ran together, seized Paul, and dragged him out of the temple, and immediately the doors were shut. Now, as they were seeking to kill him, news came to the commander of the garrison that Jerusalem was in an uproar. He immediately took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them, and when they saw the commander and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Then the commander came near and took him and commanded him to be bound with 2 chains, and he asked who he was and what he has done. And some among the multitude cried one thing and some another. So when he could not ascertain the truth because of the turmoil, he commanded him to be taken into the barracks. When he reached the stairs, he had to be carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the mob. For the multitude of the people followed after, crying out, "Away with him." So imagine that scene. It was so crazy. It was an uproar. You guys ever seen mob scenes or been able to see mobs going on? I kind of think of the Rodney King riots. It was kind of crazy like that. I mean, it was bad. I mean, the commander, he was like, "Go get him," because they didn't know what was going on. He was like, because Paul was the one who was being beat up, they assumed that he did something wrong, so he grabbed him and put him in chains, asked him who he was. But then he realized something was not right. So he kind of removed Paul from the situation to put him safe until he can ascertain what was going on. Bad scene. Misunderstandings, miscommunications, accusations, false accusations. Starting to sound familiar? Who did we see go through all that? Christ. The disciples, the apostles dealt with that. So what we see is that even with humility, people will still misunderstand you. Even with humility, people will still misunderstand you. Still remain humble. Stay humble. Stick to showing humility, because with humility, we're going to find that more people are going to realize that we're not the ones who were being accused of. What we also find is that Jesus remained humble despite the accusations, despite the fact that he was beaten, torn, and hung on the cross. He remained humble. And what we also see is that we're to follow his lead. We're to follow his lead. Paul followed his lead. The apostles, Peter followed his lead. The many people in the church there followed his lead. I'm going to have the praise team come back up. As they come back up, we need to ask ourselves this. Are you ready to finish strong? Are you ready to finish strong? What I'm going to ask you guys to do, as they do this song quietly, I'm going to ask you guys to just pray and ask God, what is it that you need to do to finish strong? Take this time right now and to reflect. What do I need to do to finish strong? What do I need to correct in my life to finish strong so that others can be led to you?